All right, this mobility routine you can use both as an assessment and as your practice to work out any kinks you might have and to just keep you in good range of motion. So from standing, we're going to kind of work from our feet up the chain. So from standing, you're just going to go onto one foot and do some foot circles. And if you find that you can't even get the top, any part of the top of your foot on the ground, do more of these. So you can do one way, do the other, and then this can also give you some information, like if you kick your hip out, that's information about some hip stability. If you can't keep balance and you go this way, that's also an indication of tightness in the hip. So even though you're doing these just as mobility, it's still good to be active with your core and to keep engaging your the proper alignment. So also noticing side to side. So this foot for me is a little bit wonky. And then switch directions. Big toe also. Big toe flexibility is linked to how we're able to use our glutes, which is kind of weird, but helpful for being able to drive off your big toe and keep alignment. Okay, so then you're going to squat down first into just a low squat. And we give this to athletes a lot just as a warm-up for strength. If you move out, that gets your adductors. And just shift side to side. Again, just see where you have tightness. You might feel it in the crease of your hips. You might feel it in the back of your hips. You might feel it in your Achilles. You might find, if you're like me, that you can't even get your heels down to the ground. So all of this is just good information for where you can make some improvements. On the other hand, if you're really flexible, that can also show, usually areas of hypermobility are next to areas of hypomobility. So if you're very, very flexible with like shoulder extension, then that would show you that you might need to get some strength there. So, and if you're also using that example, if you're really flexible there, you might be really immobile or inflexible in the rib cage that's next to where the shoulder is. Anyway, but back to the squat. So again, the treatment here is just more of the movement. So if you find that your knee hurts when you do this, back out of it to where your knee doesn't hurt and try to just get a little bit more movement. Our joints really like movement. That's how the synovial fluid can nourish the joint. So we want to get full range of motion. Wide stance. You can see what it's like to go with one leg out. Bend your knee versus straighten your knee. Other side. Again, just seeing the difference side to side. Another thing that this shows is what your back does. So mine curls under quite a bit, which is a function of my hip lack of mobility. So if that's the case for you, then you can move to doing kind of just a standing squat, trying to get a little bit more extension in your back. So my normal, I can't touch very much with my legs straight. So trying to get some extension in the back. So extension would be straight. So if that means bending to get that, that's great. And then just movement to create a little bit more length. Engage the hamstrings, engage the glutes. And if even this is too much, then bring the floor closer to you by using a yoga block, stack of books. So then as you do this, you can also feel what's going on in your knees. If you're getting creaking, if your knees go in, that gives you some information about your hips. So think about trying to kind of screw your feet into the ground and then get some more movement in the knees, see if that can help work things out. Okay, and then going back to the foot just a little bit. Ankle mobility is really helpful for running and skiing, and well, everything really. So sitting on your heels and being in plantar flexion and just hanging out here. If your feet cramp doing this, either in the arches or your toes, anywhere, you can just ease into it. So take a little bit of weight off by having a pillow there, but then work down to being able to sit on your heels. You don't, for our purposes, you don't really need to have really like overly flexible feet. So you can still, like there's no, you don't need to necessarily keep pushing it to where you can like go down to the floor. Then also tuck your toes for dorsiflexion. And again, see what your toes are doing, your big toe. So it might be that your natural is to kind of go out with your toes and your knee and your hip out. So try to keep them facing straight ahead, and again, sit back on your heels. And then there's also a difference between, like here this gets my toes quite a bit, but not as much into the ball of my foot, so I can roll back to get a little bit more movement and mobility in there. And then you can also kind of alternate with putting a little bit more pressure on that. Pretty common to have a lot of movement in like right at the toe joints, but then not as much in here. Be really tight in the back of the foot. So for that, if you have any kind of ball that you can roll, that's really helpful. We have all kinds of different mobility tools, but that can help get a racquetball works well, or a lacrosse ball, just to get that the back part of the arch. And then even as you're doing that, move your foot up and down, because that's the movement you're going to be doing during your sport. So you want to enforce that as much as possible. Then if we stand back up and we're working back up the chain, simple hip circles can just be a good way, especially if you sit at work a lot, to just get a little bit more extension. A lot of times our normal will end up being a little bit more flexion here, and so then that can turn into being flexion when you're skiing and kind of being in the back seat. So come forward and then feel where there's some tightness there. If you feel a lot of tightness there, a good stretch for that is a low lunge. So this is stretching the back leg. So with this, you just want to make sure that you step wide enough in front that you're not dumping your pelvis. If you imagine that your pelvis has water in it, you don't want to spill water forward or back, because that puts a lot of pressure on your back. So maintain engaging your core, and then again, you can kind of play around with moving forward and back and feeling where the tightness is. And then switch sides. You can make this more active if you'd like by lifting your leg. That also changes it a little bit, and then you can feel how that engages your glute. It can be really helpful to engage the antagonist muscle, so stretching the front while engaging the back. And then that also is getting those neuromuscular firings. And then finally move up, and we're just gonna go into a side stretch. We often don't think about our obliques. They do a lot of work for us, and they can get really compressed if we're sitting a lot. So just stretching those out, taking some deep breaths. And then a few arm circles. One easy way to reset your shoulder position is to put your arms over your head and then drop down, and that can be a good place to start. Have fun!